Hello, today I'm reviewing the latest case from ASUS, the TUF Gaming GT502. And this case is available in two colours, black and white, and in the UK it's going to set you back around about £160. So should this be your next case, stick around to find out. To remove the tempered glass side panel, we've got a button on the back that we need to press. That then frees up the top of the panel and the panel can simply be lifted up and away. And the other side panel is removed in exactly the same way. Taking a look at the back of the panel we've just removed, you'll notice we've got magnetic dust filters over the perforated areas. Taking a look at our case's front I/O, we've got a power and reset button, we've got two USB Type A ports, an LED control button, a single Type-C port and a combined headphone and microphone jack. It is important to mention that out of the box the ARGB controller button on the front of the case will do absolutely nothing. There is an adapter cable in the case accessory box which allows you to plug this into an ASUS controller, and then the front button will cycle through the various effects on that controller. Unfortunately, that controller doesn't come with a case. The manual does mention a plus version of the case that will come with a controller, although that doesn't currently seem to be on sale at the moment. So currently out of the box, the button on the front of the case will do absolutely nothing. At the bottom of the case we've got the TUF Gaming logo, which does light up provided you plug the case's ARGB header into either your motherboard or a suitable controller. We've got a tempered glass panel on the front, and to remove it simply needs to be pulled out from the top and then it can be lifted away. At the top of the case we've got two Velcro straps which are designed to help you move the case around, and they are designed to take the full weight of the case even when you build the system in it. To remove the top panel, we're going to need to remove the Velcro cable straps. With the Velcro straps removed, the top panel is attached at the front via a magnetic attachment. It simply needs to be tilted up from the front and then it can be lifted away. At the top of the case, we've got a removable fan stroke radiator bracket which can accommodate up to 3 120 or 2 140mm fans, or up to a 360 or 280mm radiator. The bracket is held on at the front with two screws, and once these have been removed, the bracket can be tilted up from the front and lifted out. If we take a closer look at this top bracket, you'll notice that it protrudes slightly upwards, which should do a good job of improving clearance at the top of the case and also hide the radiator nicely at the top as well. This bracket is, however, reversible, so you can turn it round, which is again going to bring the fans and radiators or anything mounted at the top further down into the case, which should give you a better view of it. It will reduce your clearance, and importantly the clearance at the top of the case for fans and radiators is up to a maximum of 72mm. At the rear of the case you can mount either a 120mm fan or radiator. Moving down to the bottom of the case, and we've got another fan bracket here. It's held on with two screws at the front, and once these have been removed the bracket can be tilted up and lifted away. On this bracket you're going to be able to mount up to 3 120mm fans. On the side of the case we've got three drive mounting brackets. They're each held on with four screws. And on each of the drive brackets we've got mounting holes for either a 2.5 inch or 3.5 inch drive. An alternative option at the side is to mount either fans or radiators, and the case is compatible with up to a 360mm radiator or 3 120mm fans. It is important to note that 140mm fans or 280mm radiators are not compatible at the side. So although a 360mm AIO is officially supported at the side of this case, during my thermal testing I really struggled to fit ASUS's own RYUO 3 AIO in at the side, and in fact there was no way for me to be able to mount it at the side at all. I did try at the front and at the back and there was just absolutely no way it was going to fit. So I think if you do want to go with a 360mm AIO, the side is not going to be your place in this case. If you do want to go with fans or maybe a smaller AIO at the side, you can still use those side drive mounting brackets down at the bottom on the removable fan stroke radiator bracket. And it looks like you can mount all three of them with a 2.5 inch drive installed, or you can put one 3.5 inch drive towards the front of the case and then two 2.5 inch drives behind it. The case is compatible with up to ATX size motherboards, and if you do want to go with a CPU air cooler, the maximum height supported is 163mm. And it's good to see we've got rubber grommets over the four main cutouts to the rear compartment. The case has 8 horizontal PCI expansion slot brackets, although if you do prefer to mount your graphics card vertically, you'll be pleased to see that a vertical GPU support bracket is included in the case accessory box. This is going to give you 3 vertical slots, and importantly they are in a good position well away from the tempered glass side panel. It is important to note that while the vertical GPU bracket comes with the case, a riser cable isn't included. In terms of GPU support, the maximum length supported is up to 400mm, and you get a really nice GPU support bracket included in the case accessory box. At the bottom of the case, we've got a full-length tray-style dust filter, which can simply be pulled out from the front. Moving into the case's rear compartment, and you can see we've got a fan-stroke-radiator bracket running horizontally along the top of this compartment. On this bracket, you can mount either 3 120 or 2 140mm fans, or up to 360 or 280mm radiator. If you prefer, you can use this bracket for mounting 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drives. It's held on with 4 screws. Once these have been removed, you'll notice the bracket can be tilted out on its hinge at the top, and to remove this bracket you need to lift upwards and outwards. So in terms of mounting an AIO in this second compartment, you'll notice we've got a little cutout to the front of the fan-stroke radiator bracket for the tubes. So you are still going to be able to mount fans on the side bracket with an AIO installed in this second compartment. At the bottom of the case, we've got a dedicated hard drive cage. It's held on with 2 thumb screws. And in this hard drive cage, you're going to be able to mount either one 3.5-inch or 2.5-inch drive. The power supply is going to go at the bottom at the back, and the case is compatible with full-sized ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 200mm. So what I want to do now is give you a look at the build I put together in the case. So the build looks great. What about the temperatures? So our i7 13700K being cooled by the 360mm AIO set to the top as exhaust, idled at 37 degrees and reached a maximum of 86 degrees during a 10-minute IDA64 stability test. The STRIX RTX 3080 mounted in the vertical position idled at 32 degrees and reached a maximum of 65 degrees during the stability test. In terms of noise levels, we had average noise levels of 34 decibels during idle and 54 decibels under load. So hopefully you'll be able to see in that video I had 3 fans at the bottom, 3 fans on the side and 3 fans in that rear compartment all set to intake. I had a rear exhaust fan and also the radiator at the top of the case set to exhaust. So the first question I wanted to answer about this case was, did having those 3 fans in the rear compartment set to intake actually make any difference to the temperatures? So I went ahead and removed the 3 fans in the second compartment, and this made absolutely no difference to the temperatures. However, our PC was 3 decibels quieter under load. So this is really useful information to know. Mounting those fans in the bracket in the second compartment is not the easiest thing to do. It's going to cost you more money for 3 additional fans. It's going to give you absolutely no benefits in terms of temperature, but it is going to make your PC louder. So my advice is not to use that bracket at the back of the case for fans. The next thing I wanted to look at was, did mounting your graphics card in the vertical or horizontal position give you the best temperatures? So leaving the 3 fans out in that second compartment, I simply turned the graphics card round to the horizontal position and reran the tests again. In the horizontal position, our GPU was 2 degrees hotter at idle and 3 degrees hotter under load. The only difference to our CPU temperatures was that our CPU was 1 degree cooler under load. And in terms of noise levels, in the horizontal position, our PC was 2 decibels louder under load. So the results here don't come as a big surprise to me. I've done a lot of testing in the 11 Dynamic Evo, which is a very similar layout to this case, and found exactly the same thing. The graphics card in the vertical position performs slightly better by a few degrees. The downside of this, I suppose, is you're going to have to pick yourself up a riser cable because it doesn't come with the case, and that is going to come at a significant cost to save a few degrees in temperature. But I think the big deciding factor is going to be the aesthetics. If you like the aesthetics in the vertical orientation, it is going to give you the best temperatures provided you're prepared to spend the extra money on the riser cable. So the next configuration I want to take a look at was one that gave me the best CPU temperatures in the original O11 Dynamic, apart from the fact that we've now got a rear fan mounting slot in the O11 Dynamic Evo and also in this case, and that was having the radiator at the top set to intake. And the big reason I liked this configuration in the original O11 Dynamic was the fact that you could then have the fans on the side set to exhaust and the good side of the fans showing. Things have moved on quite a bit, and we now have good looking fans like these Lian Uni fans, where the reverse of the fans actually looks almost as good as the front of the fans. So this has solved this issue slightly, but I did think it was still worth testing this configuration out. So we had the radiator at the top set to intake, the fans at the bottom set to intake, the fans on the side set to exhaust, and the fan at the rear set to exhaust. And for ease of access, I just kept the graphics card in the horizontal position. So comparing this configuration to our last configuration, our CPU idled 3 degrees cooler, and it was 5 degrees cooler during the AIDA64 stability test. As you'd expect, with more hot air coming into the case from the AIO, our GPU temperatures went up by 2 degrees, both at idle and under load. In terms of noise levels, this was associated with 4 decibels more noise at idle, although the noise levels under load didn't increase. So one concern with this type of configuration, where you're bringing lots of hot air in from the top of the case, is the other components in the system heating up. So I also looked at some of the other component temperatures between the last two configurations. So here our motherboard temperature increased by 8 degrees, our M.2 SSD and our chipset increased by 3 degrees, although our RAM temperature decreased by 4 degrees. So I find this to be quite a useful configuration in two situations. One, if you're trying to get the absolute best CPU temperatures that you can, and the other is if the fans that you're using in the case look great at the front but awful at the back, because it means you're going to have the good side of the fans displayed at the side of the case. Although if you're going to use nice fans like these Lian Uni fans where they look as well on one side as the other, it's almost taken away the need for a system like this, and really the only situation that I would now use it is I'm really struggling with my CPU temperatures while all the other temperatures in the case are very acceptable. It's the best way to optimize those CPU temperatures in this particular design of case. So I was planning to do some cooling configurations with the AIO mounted on the side of the case, although as I've already mentioned there was no way for me to fit this 360mm radiator on the side, which is really disappointing. Another thing to mention though is if you did actually manage to get a smaller radiator fitted on the side, I would have some concerns that the radiator wouldn't necessarily fit with all 3 fans installed at the bottom. Although I didn't try a different radiator on the side, just this ASUS one that I had installed. So the next configuration I wanted to take a look at was moving the radiator into the second compartment where I had it set to intake. I kept the fans at the bottom, the top and the rear in the same configuration, and on the side I had the fan set to intake. So comparing this to the configuration where we had the AIO at the top set to intake, there was no real significant difference to the temperatures, with our CPU running 1 degree hotter and our GPU running 1 degree cooler. This configuration was a little bit quieter though, by 1 decibel at idle and 2 decibels under load. I did try flipping the fans on the side round and then having them set to exhaust, but this was associated with worse temperatures. Our CPU increased by 2 degrees both at idle and under load, and our GPU temperature under load increased by 1 degree. So looking at these results, you might conclude that actually it's a good idea to mount your radiator in this second compartment. There's 2 reasons why I would not do this. One, a fairly small reason, and the second is an absolutely massive reason. The first small reason is the aesthetics. I don't think it looks as good from the front of this case with the radiator in this second compartment. The tubes stretching along to the back don't look good. I also think the radiator at the top of the case with the fans then below it actually fills the top of the case and hides all the cables running to the top of the motherboard fairly nicely. And again, this is a trend I've noted in a lot of other cases. So I think this is the best looking from the front, and this is the small reason. The big reason is installing your radiator in the second compartment in this case is an absolute nightmare. The build in the case up to this point had been really straightforward. once I tried to move the radiator to the back, it was an absolute nightmare, and I cannot recommend anyone trying to do this. I was making it slightly more difficult for myself because the easier way to install your radiator would be to install the radiator and fans first, bring the tubing through, and then install it to the motherboard. I didn't want to do this because I was doing it from a thermal testing point of view, and I was keen that I did not remove the pump from the CPU and reinstall the thermal paste because that could affect the results. I just wanted to move the radiator and fans, which did make it a little bit more difficult. But even if you were doing it the correct way, there is a few major downsides by occupying this slot at the back of the case. The build process is going to be much more difficult. With the radiator and fan installed, you have lost your pass-through of cables into the back of the case. Say you want to change something out in the future, it's going to be an absolute nightmare to do that. The other big thing that you're losing is cable management space. When you don't have fans and radiators at the top, above your power supply, you've got absolutely loads of space for all your cable extensions. I removed all the cable extensions when I tried to install the fans and radiator at the back of the case. That means that really the only cable routing space you have got is just down beside the power supply, because you can't have them up above the power supply because that's where your fans and radiator are. And if you're going to have fans on the side, you can't have them over behind that. So really, despite this case being massive, there is only really a tiny amount of cable routing space. And even without the cable extensions there, it was a real nightmare to get those cables to fit and the side panel to go back on again. So I cannot strongly stress this enough. I think you will really, really regret trying to put your AIO at the back of the case. And for me, I would stick to putting it in the top on this case. The only situation that I haven't tested out and where I think this compartment in the back of the case is going to be a good idea for mounting a radiator is if you have an AIO for your GPU. So you've got two radiators, one for your CPU and one for your GPU. And in that situation, it might be a good location to have one of them in at the back. But outside that, I would stick to keeping your radiator in the main compartment. So now we come on to my experience of building in the GT502. And with the build I put together in the build guide, this was a really easy case to build in, and it would be absolutely perfect for a beginner. What I would say is if you're using this particular AIO, make sure you have the tubes at the bottom of the pump, because all the effects on the AIO are with it in this orientation, and in the software I was not able to rotate the screen round. I used the black version of the AIO in my previous build, and I had put the tubes at the side, and in the software I could not get it to turn round at all, and then ended up having to turn the pump round so the effects were being displayed the right way round. The other things that are important is if you're going with the graphics card in the vertical orientation like I did in the build guide, make sure you get all the cables plugged in at the bottom of the motherboard, because once your graphics card goes in, you're not going to have access to those ports. I suppose the only issues I had with building in this case were during my thermal testing, in that I could not get a 360mm radiator to fit at the side of the case, and installing the fans at the back of the case did make the build quite a bit more difficult, and as the thermal testing has now shown, there's no benefit, so I wouldn't recommend doing that. And in terms of putting an AIO at the back of the case, I've said aesthetically I don't think it looks as good at the front, but your build difficulty goes up exponentially. I've got cuts in my hands from trying to get everything lined up and pass through. I had to remove all my cable extensions. Cable management at the back is going to be an absolute nightmare. So my one bit of advice to you is don't even go down this route. If you do want to do it and don't want to listen to me, I told you so. So now we come on to the things I liked about the case, and I think the first thing I liked about the case is the look. This is a good looking case, and I was absolutely delighted with the build I put together in it. The build quality is excellent throughout. Most important, I think it's the toolless design and the fine touches that ASUS have put together in this case. I absolutely love the mechanism for removing the side panels with a little button that you press at the back and then the panels popping out and being able to remove them. Up at the top of the case, I think the straps are a great idea. If you're somebody who doesn't move your case about an awful lot, you'll probably not get much benefit from them. I do a lot of thermal testing. I'm moving the case from here to there. I'm turning it around, moving it about on the table. And these were a really good way of moving it about. And I had no issues at all moving a nice heavy case with lots of components in it. I also thought the mechanism for the top panel is really good. It's magnetically attached at the front, which is just a nice touch. I like the fact that a lot of the panels tilt out and insert nicely. The invertible fan bracket at the top of the case, bringing your fans further up or further down depending on what you want, is good as well. The rear panel, being able to invert and get the graphics card in the vertical position, is a great idea, and really useful vertical mounting slots in a nice position well away from the tempered glass panel. Other things I liked about the case were the ARGB logo on the front. I thought this looked really smart. I like the fact that we had rubber grommets over 4 of the cutouts, and as well I thought the decision not to include fans with the case was a smart move. People who want to build in, I think, these sort of cases are going to be very particular about the type of fans, particularly when they're going to be displayed on the side. And this was a good way of being able to keep the costs down. So I think this was a smart move. So this brings me on to the things I didn't like about the case. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is the side radiator mounting. The fact that we were unable to fit ASUS's own 360mm radiator at the side is incredibly disappointing. It's advertised as being capable to fit a 360, but there was absolutely no way for this radiator to fit. And I also worry that if there was a smaller 360mm radiator on the market that could fit, I worry that you wouldn't be able to fit 3 120mm fans in front of it. That space also looked quite tight. Another thing I really didn't like about this case is having a button that you can't use out of the box. So we do have that ARGB control button on the front of the case, but out of the box it does absolutely nothing when you press it. And you are going to have to pick up an ASUS hub and plug the fans into that to give the button functionality. And if you want to go with different fans, you're going to be stuck with this button on the front of the case that does absolutely nothing. And I think you're probably aware by now that I wasn't a great fan of this fan stroke radiator mounting bracket in the second compartment of the case. It was a nightmare to use. It blocked up a lot of the access to the other building components, and should you want to change something out in the future, it was going to be incredibly difficult. And it didn't really provide that big of an advantage in terms of temperatures as well. It also blocked up a lot of space. Basically above the power supply, it was just wasted space if you weren't going to mount fans or radiators in that slot. And another thing I wasn't a big fan of was the cable management solutions at the back of the case. There is cable tie-down points and Velcro straps and cable ties included in the case accessory box, but I did think actually having some clips that the cables could be slotted into, or some pre-installed Velcro cable slots and cable organizers at the back would have made a real difference in this case. Another thing I didn't like is the large unfiltered cutout above the power supply. ASUS has done a brilliant job in this case in terms of dust filters, a full length one at the bottom, we've got one at the top and lots of dust filters on the side. But then to leave this unfiltered cutout at the rear just does not make any sense to me. Particularly when you've got side fans and actually in the second compartment you're designed to mount fans or radiators. This is just potential to draw unfiltered air and clog your system up with dust. So I can't for the life of me understand why they've done this. So we've now reached the point in the review where I need to tell you, should you go out and buy this case? And in general, if you're planning to build on it like I've built in it with the radiator at the top, I think you're going to have a good build experience and come up with a nice looking build and be very happy with this case. There is really only one slight problem with this case, and that is that the O11 Dynamic Evo exists. And I'm sure you're looking at this and going, this looks like the O11 Dynamic Evo. And because they look so similar, we're going to have to compare the two. In terms of price, there's about £20 currently in the UK in difference between them. And I think in a case in this price bracket, £20 makes absolutely no difference in your buying decisions. It's a fairly expensive case and you're going to want to get whichever one of the two is the best. In terms of advantages of this case, really the aesthetics would be one of the advantages if you like the look of this case. Others will like the look of the O11 Dynamic Evo, so this is very subjective, so you can't really, for me to say one looks better than the other, because that's going to depend on your own personal preference. The other side advantage of this case would be if you've got a lot of ASUS components and you want to stay in that same ecosystem, it's a way of keeping that branding throughout your whole PC. The other, I suppose, advantage of this case is the fan stroke radiator mounting location at the back compartment. I really didn't like this, but if you were wanting to go with an AIO in your GPU, I could see it being an advantage, although I specifically haven't tested this. The 011 Dynamic Evo does, however, have a lot of advantages over this case. One, in that you're not going to have any difficulty with mounting fans and radiators on the side and at the bottom. And in this case, radiator mounting isn't officially supported at the bottom, and I didn't try it. There's a lot more configurable options in the 011 Dynamic Evo as well. You can get a mesh panel from the front, you can invert it, and then you can mount your graphics card in the upright position as well. You can move the I/O module. The back of the case in the 011 Dynamic Evo, I think, is slightly better designed as well. And I think a large reason I'm saying that is I think there's a lot of wasted space in the back of this case. Above the power supply, if you're not using the fan stroke radiator bracket at the top, there's really a lot of wasted space there. The 011 Dynamic Evo makes use of that with the hard drive cage, which can accommodate 2 drives above the power supply, or being able to install a second power supply if you wish. And I think the cable management in that case is much better. They've got really nice clips for managing your cables. In this case, you're stuck with Velcro cable straps and cable ties, which aren't pre-installed. So for me, comparing the two cases, this is a very good case. And if the 011 Dynamic Evo didn't exist, I could be very strongly recommending this case to you. As I've mentioned, if the aesthetics and staying in that ASUS ecosystem and that rear mounting slot are important to you, there is a reason to go with this case over the 011 Dynamic Evo. But I think all the other features would push me personally to the 011 Dynamic Evo. So hopefully you have enjoyed this video. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. And remember, if you do want to do a build in this case, make sure you check out the full build guide that I've done on it, and you'll find a link to that video in the description. Thanks for watching.